Welcome to MysteryCon. There's something strange about the way certain towns go quiet. Not all at once, more like a slow hush. Like someone's holding their breath just long enough for you to forget what the air used to sound like. I didn't go looking for stories like this. I thought I was done chasing shadows. But shadows have a way of finding, or especially when they're cast by something buried. This collection isn't fiction. These are voices that slipped through the cracks. People who saw too much, asked the wrong questions, or noticed one detail no one else did. And the deeper I went, the more I realized. Every small town has its secrets. Some are covered with concrete. Others are stitched into fabric. A few are sealed under old mines, dry soil, or fake zoning maps. But they all share one thing: someone wanted them forgotten. So I started listening, and now it's your turn. They buried the truth under our feet. We just stopped digging until now. When the mines closed, they didn't just bury our jobs, they buried the truth under a mountain of paperwork no one was supposed to read. My name's Raylan Tate. I spent 41 years underground longwall crews, mostly until the mines finally shuttered and the men around here started drifting like ghosts. I still wake up at 4:30 out of habit, though there's no whistle to chase anymore. This town, Hardison Ridge, used to move with the rhythm of shift changes and coal trains. Now the silence is louder than the sirens ever were. The real trouble started when they announced the high school would be closing, not merging. Closing said it was due to a budget surplus, which made about as much sense as snow in July. I didn't think much of it at first. Schools close all the time in towns like ours. But then I started seeing things. Shiny new SUVs in the school board lot. Harold Kirkland, an old blasting buddy, told me he saw machinery working the back fields behind the school fence and marked. Trucks with out-of-state plates, bulldozers painted black, and private development stenciled in white. He swore he saw them unloading crates at midnight. I figured Harold had finally started talking to ghosts, until I checked the county land records myself. What I found didn't add up. The deed to the school had been transferred quietly, and not to the county, but to a limited partnership out of Panama. No press release, no community vote, just a signature from our superintendent and a scanned copy of a contract that reeked of foreign money. I spent the next 2 weeks buried in the county records office, drinking bad vending machine coffee and learning more about holding companies than I ever wanted to know. Every document led to another name, another mailbox in Delaware or the Caymans. But they all circled back to one man, Devlin Moreau. He made his fortune gutting mines and selling the scraps. Now he called himself a philanthropist, shaking hands at church potlucks and sponsoring youth basketball tournaments. But behind the smiles, he was carving up our town one loophole at a time, and I wasn't about to let that story get paved over like the rest of our history. The paper trail was clever, just clean enough to stay legal, just vague enough to stay hidden. One holding company leased the land to another, which subcontracted it for feasibility studies to a firm that didn't even have a working website. The lease terms were sealed by court order, citing competitive confidentiality. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a school. It was about silence, how much it cost, and who was willing to buy it. I started asking around, not outright just questions disguised as small talk. Folks got nervous. Some changed the subject. Others looked over their shoulders before muttering that maybe I should just let it go. That's not how we used to be. There was a time when we had each other's backs, when a man could speak his mind without worrying if his neighbor was being paid not to listen. I paid a visit to the county archives office again and asked to see older maps back when the school first opened in the 60s. The clerk, a younger guy who used to bag groceries at McKinley's, looked uncomfortable but handed them over. One map caught my eye. A faint dotted line ran beneath the school property, marked inactive mine number 1 to B. I knew that shaft. It had been sealed in '87 after a methane scare, but I remembered the company used to store records and equipment down there before it was capped. That night, I drove out to the edge of the old mine road, just past where the asphalt ends and the kudzu takes over. I parked by the rusted gate and walked the path I hadn't seen in decades. The mine entrance was still sealed, but not like it used to be. The welded steel plate that once blocked the mouth was gone, replaced by a sheet of plywood screwed in with clean, new fasteners. Someone had been down there. Recently, I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I took pictures. Every angle, every bolt, then I backed out, slow and quiet. When I returned home, my router was blinking red. No internet. My cell signal was gone, too. Just static. It could have been coincidence. But in towns like Hardison Ridge, we stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. The outage lasted 3 days. No signal, no service, no explanation. I drove to the next county just to send an email with the mine entrance photos. Sent it to myself, to a backup drive, and to a friend from my union days who owed me a favor. I didn't write much in the message, just enough to let him know it mattered. When I got back, there was a black sedan parked 2 houses down. I'd never seen it before, and it didn't belong to anyone on this street. Tinted windows, clean tires, even after the gravel roads. I didn't go near it, just kept walking. Like I hadn't noticed. That night, someone knocked on my door. Not loud, not impatient, just 2 knocks, soft and steady. I stayed quiet. After a minute, they knocked again. Then silence. I waited another 10 before peeking out the side window. The sedan was gone. Next morning, my mailbox was open, flag up, but empty. I don't use it often, mostly bills and junk, but I always keep it closed. The latch isn't loose. It doesn't open by itself. I drove to Harold's. He didn't answer the door, but his truck was in the driveway. I left a note under his wiper, call me. Something's off. I haven't heard from him since. I checked the school grounds that night, from the tree line behind the baseball field. A portable generator was running, faint hum in the dark, and floodlights lit up the back. Half of the property. They were digging quietly, after hours. A backhoe moved dirt near where the maintenance shed used to be. I could see 2 men, both in reflective vests, no logos. They weren't local. I could tell by how they moved, efficient, no wasted motion. Professionals. I backed away before they saw me. I didn't sleep. The truth was growing faster than I could chase it. This wasn't just land development. Something was buried under that school, something they needed. And they were willing to pull every thread from this town's past just to get it. I kept the flash drive hidden in an old coffee can beneath the floorboards in my garage. It held every scan, photo, and record I'd pulled since this started. I made copies, but something told me the original mattered more than the rest. That morning, I headed into town to see May Collister. She ran the library and used to teach history before the schools consolidated. If anyone knew something about that minor, what might have been left behind, it was her. I asked about archival maps, old geological surveys, anything public. She didn't say much, just motioned toward the backstacks and followed me there. Once we were alone, she leaned in close. "Whatever you're chasing, Raylan, you need to stop. This town doesn't ask questions anymore. That's how we survive." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw fear behind her eyes. Not confusion fear. I told her I couldn't let it go. She sighed and handed me a folder she'd pulled. Months ago, when the school board's changes first began, this was supposed to be archived, but it never made it. Inside were photocopies dated 1974, stamped classified internal use only. A federal agency I'd never heard of had tested soil samples beneath the school, citing deep anomalies and legacy asset containment. It didn't mention what they found, only that the site was placed under a long-term monitoring agreement. The signature at the bottom wasn't a local name, it was military. I leapt through the side entrance, folder under my arm. On the drive home, I spotted that same black sedan in my rearview mirror, 2 car lengths back, no lights on, no license plate. I turned off the main road and took the old quarry route. They didn't follow, not that time. That night, I scanned the documents and backed up everything again. May had risked her job to give me that file. Maybe more. If the military had a reason to monitor a sealed mine under a public school, it wasn't about safety. It was about secrecy. And secrets don't stay buried unless someone's paid to keep them quiet. 2 days later, a package arrived on my porch. No return address, just my name typed clean across the label. Inside was a worn ledger bound in canvas, stained and brittle. The pages were handwritten in blocky script, dated from 1981 through 1983. Most entries listed names, dates, and short notes in code I couldn't make full sense of. But a few stood out. One line read, "Transfer complete. School site stable. Monitoring resumed." Another, "Asset remains intact. No surface breach reported." The handwriting matched the signature on the federal file May had given me. I didn't know how it got to me or who sent it, but it confirmed what I'd feared: something had been hidden under that school long before it ever taught a student. I called the friend I'd emailed earlier, the union man. He picked up after 2 rings, voice tense. "Raylan," he said, "they're not just digging for land value. This goes deeper than money." The name Devlin Marrow came up in a closed-door briefing at a conference last year. Someone flagged him for asset recovery. Contracts classified ones. I asked him what that meant. He hesitated. "It means he's cleaning up old sites. Sites with government history. Sites they can't risk going public." I hung up and stared at the ledger, heart pounding. Devlin wasn't buying land, he was erasing something. I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing every name in that book with public records. One stood out, J. Cleary, listed twice. Once in 1982 with a note, "Incident at perimeter, subject transferred." Then again in 1991, marked deceased. I remembered that name. Jeremy Cleary had been a janitor at the school when I was still underground. Rumor was he left town after a nervous breakdown. Now it seemed he didn't leave by choice. I called Harold again. Still no answer. I drove past his place that night. His truck was gone, porch light still on. Something in my gut told me he wasn't coming back. Whatever Devlin and his people were after, they were cleaning house. Not just files, but people. And I was running out of time to do something before I ended up in someone else's ledger. I didn't sleep, just sat in the garage. The ledger open on my workbench, the air thick with dust and tension. I kept thinking about Jeremy Clara, how a man could vanish without a headline, without even a question. My fingers hovered over the keyboard of the old laptop I used for the blog. Cold Truth had never been more than a quiet space for stories and memories, but now it was the only outlet I had. I wrote for hours, slow, careful, no speculation, just facts. I uploaded scans of the ledger, the soil report, photos of the mine entrance, and the school excavation. Then I hit publish. For the first time, I added a voice recording, just me talking. I told people what I'd found, what it meant, and what I feared was coming. I didn't use names that didn't need using. I didn't make accusations I couldn't prove, but I left breadcrumbs, enough for anyone paying attention to follow. Within 24 hours, the post had 1,000 views. By the next night, it had 10,000. I received emails from other towns, places where schools had closed under strange circumstances, where land was quietly repurposed. Some sounded paranoid. Others had details too sharp to ignore. One message stood out. It came from someone claiming to be a former geotech contractor. He wrote, "They're digging up containment sites, not for development, for removal. What they buried, they can't control anymore." I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to. But I knew it confirmed one thing: whatever was under that school wasn't supposed to be disturbed. That week, the county announced a controlled demolition of the building ahead of schedule. Fencing went up. Access was blocked. They said it was for safety, but nobody bought it. I drove by late one evening and saw the lights still on inside, though no workers were around. That same night, my house lost power for 6 hours. When it came back, my laptop was wiped completely blank. Every file, every backup, gone, but they'd made a mistake. I'd already mirrored everything to foreign servers and peer-to-peer networks. The story was out. The silence they paid for had cracked. And once a crack forms in bedrock, it only gets wider. The demolition was set for Saturday at dawn. By Friday night, a quiet crowd had gathered along the fence. No signs, no shouting, just neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a sky that felt too still. I stood with them, hood up, face low. I saw kids who used to walk those halls, and parents who remembered when that school meant something. We watched in silence, not because we were afraid, but because we wanted to witness whatever came next. Around midnight, unmarked trucks rolled in, black, clean, and silent. The men who stepped out weren't construction workers. They moved, with precision, speaking into radios clipped to their collars. One carried a hard case the size of a coffin. I recognized the sheriff near the gate. He didn't argue, just unlocked it and walked away. The trucks backed up to the gym entrance. That's when I felt it, a low-frequency rumble, not loud, but thick, like it crawled inside your bones. The ground didn't shake, but my chest tightened. It felt like pressure beneath the earth was shifting. I turned to the woman beside me. Her phone was out, recording, hands trembling. Others followed. Some whispered, some prayed. The lights inside the school flickered. A sharp buzz cut through the night as the gym's overheads burst. Then everything went still. No wind, no sound, just dead quiet. Minutes later, the trucks pulled out, slow, deliberate. Whatever they came for, they'd taken it. The demo crew arrived before sunrise, knocked down what was left, and buried it all in clean fill. When I got home, my power was out. My laptop wiped, but they missed something. Weeks ago, I'd mirrored my blog to 3 foreign servers and a peer-to-peer archive. The The post was still live, the downloads still climbing. Later that day, I found a new message from the whistleblower. It was behavioral containment of exposure, emotional volatility, dissociation, mass psychogenic risk. Whatever it touched, it changed. That night, I sat alone in the dark, replaying that sound under the school. I wasn't sure if it was machinery or something older, something alive. They tried to bury it. But I'm a miner's son. I know how to dig, and I know when something is still breathing beneath the rock. It's been 6 weeks since the demolition. The school's going just gravel now, flattened and fenced. They say a community center's going up next year, but no one believes that. Most folks avoid the area. Nothing grows there. No birds, no sound. Just a dead patch of land where something was buried too deep and dug up too fast. I've kept writing. I started interviewing people, quiet types, the kind who usually keep their heads down. A woman from Clifton said her town lost 3 teachers after a renovation project revealed sealed tunnels under their middle school. A farmer in Westmoreland swore his water went bad the day a federal crew bulldozed a sinkhole near his fields, then paved over it like nothing happened. Patterns. All of it part of the same map. These sites weren't random. They followed a shape and arc that ran along old mining territory, places the government once wrote off as unstable. But maybe the ground wasn't the only thing they couldn't control. May left town last week. She didn't say goodbye, just left a note under my windshield. I hope it was worth it. Be careful, Raylan. I don't blame her. She did what she could. We all did. Now it's about what comes next. The town's changed. Folks make eye contact again, but there's caution behind it. Like we all know a secret now, and we're not sure who else is listening. The sheriff retired suddenly, said nothing in his resignation. His house went up for sale the next day. No one's seen Devlin Marrow since. His name's still on the development permit, but word is he pulled funding. Maybe he knew they uncovered more than they meant to. Or maybe he's moved on to the next town on that map. I still check my mirrors. I still keep the originals locked away, hard copies stored out of reach. Not because I'm scared. I'm past that. Because the story's not finished. Somewhere under concrete and soil, the past is still breathing. And if they come back to bury it again, they'll find me waiting, light on, voice steady, pages turning. This time, I won't be digging alone. They buried the truth in patents. He unearthed it in seeds. They didn't steal the land the way you'd expect. They bled it out with forms, fees, and fake concern. I held out as long as I could. But when the final letter came, postmarked and stamped like a death notice, I didn't fight. I just watched the soil dry up from behind a cracked window. My name is Jacob Aliasson. I used to run 76 acres of dryland wheat and seed potatoes out in northern Idaho, 3rd generation. Now I live in the old hunting cabin off the county road, no running water but plenty of quiet. After the land was gone, I started trading heirloom seeds, Cherokee corn, red Russian kale, Danvers, carrots. Crops that still remembered how to fight. I kept careful records, each shipment labeled, bartered for, packed by hand. At first, I blamed bad weather or careless postmen when the rarest varieties stopped arriving. But then I noticed the pattern. Shipments disappearing across state lines. Tracking numbers, black-holed, mid-route. Only the rarest, oldest seeds going dark. Not bulk orders, not common hybrids. Just the ones you couldn't buy at feed stores. The ones with names whispered like prayers. I started baiting them fake names, false orders, tracked every click, every bounce of IP. The trail led to a local AgriCorp Sunfield Agrotech. Clean logo, bright website, sustainable innovation stamped on every glossy page. They weren't stealing seeds to grow. They were reclassifying them as biohazards, quarantining them, then sequencing their DNA. I found the filing's provisional patents for traits older than the county courthouse. They were locking up genetics passed from grandmother to granddaughter, then watermarking them and calling it progress. I thought I could stay quiet, but then someone left a Sunfield brochure on my porch, sealed in a plastic sleeve. Nothing inside but 3 words: we protect innovation. That night, I couldn't sleep. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My computer was slower than it should have been. My tires were slashed before dawn. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. I didn't want to sound like the paranoid guy with canned beans and no TV. But this wasn't survivalist fiction. It was happening. The seeds were disappearing. And if I didn't stop it, no one would. I started digging not into the ground, but through records. County archives, shipping manifests, seed catalogs from before the internet swallowed everything. I built a spreadsheet the way a man might build a fence tight, deliberate, every row a post holding back the tide. The same pattern repeated itself. Heirloom varieties quietly removed from circulation, websites going offline, growers suddenly unlisted. I called a woman I'd traded with in Montana used to send me painted mountain corn every spring. Her line was dead. I called again a week later. This time, someone answered. A man. Didn't say who he was, just told me to stop asking questions and hung up. The next morning, I drove out to an abandoned nursery near Clearwater. Old place, long closed, but the owner had archived seed catalogs back to the 1960s. I found something strange in the '89 edition, a listing for a breed called Sandfire wheat, marked extinct 2 years later. I'd never heard of it, which was odd. It should have shown up somewhere, even in folklore. But it was gone, like it had been erased. The patent filings told the real story. Sunfield had claimed novel grain tolerances traced to a wild barley genome, but their patent included a marker I recognized from an old USDA soil survey. It matched Sandfire exactly. They hadn't discovered it. They'd stolen it, repackaged it, renamed it. That's when I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I logged back into the old Growers Forum quiet place. Mostly retired farmers, folks who still spoke in seasons instead of quarters. I posted a thread, simple title, Heirloom Theft Patterns, Need Verification. Within hours, 2 replies. By nightfall, I had 14. Stories like mine, scattered across the Midwest. Varieties once shared at seed swaps, now vanished or suddenly trademarked. Someone was consolidating the genetic past one rare crop at a time. I started using encrypted messages, burned my original notes, moved my seed archive off-grid into an old root cellar that hadn't seen daylight in decades. I didn't know if they'd come back or when, but I knew they weren't finished. They weren't just patenting traits, they were scrubbing the lineage, rewriting the agricultural record to make it look like their version was the only one that ever existed. And if they erased the past, who'd remember what freedom tasted like? One of the names from the forum stuck with Mealden Price. He used to grow a strain of drought-tolerant beans called Calico Ridge, native to this region long before irrigation was common. He hadn't posted in over a year, but I remembered trading with him once, a decade back. His envelope came with a handwritten note, "Save what remembers the dust." I drove 6 hours to find him. His land sat outside a dry valley near the Snake River, far from any paved road. No mailbox, no cell reception, just a dirt path winding through pale grass and rusted equipment. When I reached the house, it was empty. Windows boarded, power cut. A tractor sat in the field, half disassembled, as if someone had walked away mid-repair. I checked the barn. Inside, the shelves were bare, but the walls were lined with nails hooks where seed jars used to hang. You could see the outlines in the dust, like shadows left behind. It wasn't vandalism, it was a clean-out. Someone had taken the archive, deliberately and completely. I found a corner of the loft that hadn't been cleared. Under a tarp was a sealed box, labeled "Not for Trade." Inside was sealed packets bean seeds, tightly wrapped in foil. Alongside them, a leather-bound journal. No entries, just sketches, pod diagrams, root structures, crop rotation cycles. But the last page stopped me cold. It was a diagram of a facility, not a farm, but a lab. Grid lines, server banks, climate control units. One corner was marked Genome Containment Chamber. Eldon had seen something, or maybe he'd been inside. I snapped photos and took the box. I didn't stay long, too quiet. On the drive back, a black SUV followed me for 20 miles. Number plates. When I slowed, it stayed even. When I turned off, it kept going. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Eldon's profile on the forum was gone. Not deactivated, deleted, as if he'd never been there. All his posts, gone. But I had the seeds, and I had his drawings. Whoever had cleaned him out hadn't found everything, not yet. And if they were watching me now, they'd already made a mistake. I wasn't alone anymore. A week after visiting Eldon's farm, I started noticing changes in the packages I sent. Anything labeled rare or region-specific was delayed or rerouted. A man I trusted in Kansas wrote that his envelope arrived, opened, resealed with a federal quarantine notice. The label read, "Non-compliant biological specimen." I checked the tracking logs. None of the packages had left Idaho. They'd been stopped and relabeled before ever reaching a sorting center. I ran tests and identical packages under different names, different addresses. Only the ones linked to heirloom strains were intercepted. It wasn't random. Someone was running filters on metadata, flagging certain terms. Landris, unregistered. Novi Sechi Zero seeds were being profiled the way some people profiled threats. I stopped using real names. Started mailing from towns to counties over. Wearing gloves, avoiding cameras. It felt absurd at first, like some bad spy movie. But the more I dug, the more precise the net became. They weren't just watching, they were learning. One night, I broke into the local ag extension office. I'd done repair work there years ago and still remembered where they kept the server backups. I wasn't looking for anything big, just wanted to confirm a suspicion. What I found changed everything. Inside a hidden admin directory was a mirrored copy of the state's agricultural registry, except this version had annotations, color-coded tags, timestamps, cross-referenced GPS coordinates. A red tag meant something had been quarantined. Yellow was pending review. Green meant cleared for assimilation. That was the word they used. Assimilation. Crops weren't being outlawed. They were being absorbed, coded, renamed, reissued under corporate labels. They were claiming heritage, as innovation, and no one outside the system would ever know. I copied the files and wiped the drive. When I got back to the cabin, the motion light outside my barn was on. No wind, no animals, just a steady beam over the gravel. I didn't go outside. I waited, crouched near the window with a bat in one hand and my backup drive in the other. Nothing happened, but the next morning, my mailbox was gone. Not knocked, over, removed. Bolts unscrewed clean, as if it had never been there. Like they wanted me to know I was being read, not just watched. I stopped using the internet, disconnected the satellite dish, scrubbed the cabin clean of any signal. From then on, every message went out through handwritten notes dropped at feed stores or taped beneath benches at public parks. It took longer, but the replies came. Not many, but enough. One envelope arrived postmarked from Nebraska, no return address. Inside was a single phrase, block letters typed on a manual typewriter. You're not the only one building a vault. No name, no further detail. But it was enough. I followed the postmark and found a contact through an old grain Copan agronomist named Libby Hayes. She worked under a research grant tied to public seed banks, supposedly for drought-resilient studies. But when we met, she handed me a hard drive. Inside a hollowed-out soil pH meter. On it were genome maps, detailed sequences of heritage crops flagged as restricted access. Most were from varieties listed as extinct. Others were labeled pre-commercial lineage, dormant. That was their term for stolen. I asked where she got the files. She just said, "People talk to me when they think no one's listening." Libby told me the government had entered into silent partnerships with major agri-corporations, Sunfield among them, under the guise of biosecurity. They'd created a watch list cataloguing not just plant strains, but the people who traded them. She called it the Heritage Risk Index. Each person rated by how many unregistered traits passed through their hands. I asked where I ranked. She didn't answer. That night, I buried the pH meter under the compost pile and burned every receipt I'd kept for 5 years. The next morning, I texted Libby to tell her someone had tried to torch my backup drive. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. By midday, I sent one last message. "Let me know you're okay." No details. Nothing came back. I waited, telling myself she might have gone dark on purpose. But by evening, I checked the link she'd sent for her field reports. Gone. Her photo had vanished from the university's staff directory. Even cached versions had been purged. It wasn't just that she'd disappeared. It was like she'd never existed in the first place. Then, taped to my door, I found a scrap of paper in the same typewriter font. "Silence preserves. Speech corrupts." That was the phrase they used to justify disappearance. I didn't speak for the rest of the day. I just sat in the cellar with my seed jars lined like soldiers, each one holding the history someone wanted erased. They hadn't gotten to mine, not yet. I knew I had to do something irreversible, not a message, not another encrypted exchange, or late-night drop. Something public, permanent. I went back to the hard drive Libby had given me, spent 3 days offline cataloging everything, trait maps, DNA strings, internal memos. I labeled each file with its original variety name and origin year when known. Then I added proof. Patent filings from Sunfield and others, showing direct matches to stolen genetics. The language was technical, but the theft was obvious. These weren't new discoveries. They were old seeds, dressed in modern code, locked behind paywalls, and protected by force. I packaged everything into a compressed archive, added a README file with instructions, and uploaded it to 5 separate peer-to-peer networks. Then I seeded the torrent from 3 devices across 2 libraries and an internet cafe a town over. I called it the Seed Vault. Not the real one in Norway, the digital one, built from theft and preservation, truth and risk. It spread fast. Within hours, the files were mirrored, archived, translated. One site called it agricultural whistleblowing. Another called it digital seed activism. I didn't care about the labels. I just wanted it to live beyond me. The next night, I knew they'd been here. Not inside, just close. My trail camera near the tree line was missing, and a set of boot prints circled the barn without ever leading to the door. They'd watched, measured, decided. At 3:12 a.m., a spotlight hit my window. No engine, no movement, just light, steady and silent. I didn't get up, I just stared back. After 10 minutes, it turned off. I waited until morning, then found a single item nailed to the oak tree out front. A copy of my README file. No edits. No comment. Just a red stamp across the top, observed. They weren't warning me to stop, they were reminding me they could have stopped me, but didn't. Yet, I took it down and burned it. But I smiled for the first time in weeks. They could watch all they wanted. It was already too late. The seeds were out, and not even they could patent the truth once it belonged to everyone. I stayed quiet after the upload. Didn't reach out, didn't move files, just waited. Days passed without noise. No visits, no notes, not even the light. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then one morning, I woke to the smell of smoke. Not fire-burnt plastic. I ran outside. My backup laptop, the one I kept buried beneath the floorboards of the barn, was sitting upright in the driveway. Its casing was melted clean through. No message, just heat and warning. I didn't panic. I didn't speak. I just swept the pieces into a metal pail and buried them under the west fence line with the broken axle from the old seed drill. That same afternoon, I heard from someone new. A woman out of Oregon said she'd found my torrent while researching antique grains. She downloaded the full archive, then printed copies of every map and marker. Said she was building a physical library, real paper, real binders, no screens. I asked why. She said, "You can't erase paper with a keystroke." Others followed. A botanist in Vermont, a permaculture teacher in Arizona, a school garden coordinator in Detroit. None of them asked for help. They just wanted to let me know. They had the seeds now too. That was all I needed. I didn't sleep much anymore. The nights were quiet, but too still, like the air was listening. I kept the cellar locked, checked the jars daily. The oldest ones I held a little longer, scarlet runner beans, moon and stars, melons, seeds older than the flag on my wall. I don't know what comes next. Maybe they come for me. Maybe they already did, and this is the part where they wait me out. Let the silence work. But I'm not afraid. Not anymore. I used to think farming was about yield. Now I know it's about memory. Every seed I saved carries the weight of someone else's hands, someone who refused to let their crop vanish into dust. And now that memory's everywhere, buried in packets, passed across fences, slipped into books and bartered in quiet corners. I used to grow for market. Now I grow for history. And history, once planted, doesn't forget. They weren't redeveloping the town. They were erasing it and people like me with it. They didn't evict me with threats or lawyers. They did it with a zoning map and a smile. My name's Chaz Dominico. Used to be known for running numbers and running my mouth, back before I realized the real power sits in conference rooms, not back rooms. These days, I own a pizza joint on the Jersey Shore, a cash business. Legit, as clean as the health inspector's clipboard would let me be. I flipped dough, served tourists cheap beer and greasy slices, and kept a polite distance from my family name. Then, last winter, a plain white envelope slipped under my shop door changed all that. Inside was a zoning notice, nothing dramatic. Just a realignment of the coastal floodplain designation. But when I cross-checked the new overlay with the redevelopment map, I saw the catch. My shop now sat in a corridor targeted for accelerated acquisition. It meant eminent domain without the courtesy of a town hall vote. At first, I figured it was a paperwork screw-up, maybe something to clear up in person. But when I went down to the township office, the girl behind the counter looked at my ID like it burned her fingers. Said all physical files had been archived off-network during a digital transition, whatever that meant. The moment I walked out of there, something shifted in me. That old weight, the one I thought I'd shrugged off when Pop died in Trenton lockup, settled right back on my shoulders. Curiosity turned to concern real quick when I found out half the boardwalk got the same letter. Guys like me, old names. Legacy leases, businesses too stubborn to sell. And one by one, they were folding. Fast, quiet, no press, no lawsuits. Just closed for renovation signs and corporate logos moving in. I called in a couple favors. Sal from Newark said he'd heard something about a casino group sniffing around our zip code. Luxembourg money, shell corporations, no paper trail, but plenty of whispers. It wasn't just a land grab, it was a cleanse. The kind that doesn't make headlines, just history. I knew then that this wasn't just about my shop. They were rewriting the town, and they were doing it in silence. I started making calls that night, not the kind you log in a smartphone, but numbers I'd memorized years ago and hoped I'd never need again. First was Dino, used to run permits for a paving company that only laid asphalt when city council nodded yes. He owed me from a mess in 2012 involving a missing bid envelope and a mysteriously delayed traffic study. When I asked about the rezoning corridor, he went quiet, said the paperwork had bypassed local planning altogether, fast-tracked through a public-private development task force that hadn't held a public meeting in over a year. I asked who chaired it. He hung up. Next was Frankie Corsi, real estate appraiser turned consultant. He met me behind a shuttered bait shop, eyes darting like we were teenagers sneaking smokes. Frankie said he'd seen cash offers flying around. Our side of the boardwalk, way above market, no inspections, no contingencies. The buyers weren't corporate reps either, they were private brokers. Always different faces, always driving rentals with out-of-state plates. But the deeds, they traced back to one firm, Atlantic Star Holdings. I looked it up later. Just a P.O. box in Wilmington and a 2-page website that said local growth, global reach. By the weekend, something else changed. My regulars at the shop got jumpy. Paulie from the surf shop started locking his door during business hours. Tessa from the smoothie stand caught someone taking pictures of her store at 2 a.m. Then my distributor called, said they'd be pausing deliveries until a payment issue cleared. I hadn't missed a bill in 6 years. When I checked my business account, it was frozen compliance audit pending. No one could tell me who flagged it or why. That's when it hit me. This wasn't pressure, it was a squeeze. Not enough to make noise, just enough to choke me out of the picture, and I knew how this worked. Not from the papers, but from the way my old man used to talk when he thought I wasn't listening. You don't fight something like this head on. You trace it sideways. So I started watching. Who walked past the shop twice in the same hour? Which cars never parked but always circled? I stopped being a business owner. I started being a witness. Quiet, patient, and ready. I started pulling property records late at night from a terminal at the county library, one of the few places left that didn't ask questions if you stayed past closing time. Most people think real estate changes hands with fanfare. Lawyers, agents, champagne photos. But what I found was the opposite. Half the block had already changed ownership in the last 6 months. Not a single press release, not a single sold. Sin, the names on the deeds were all different: Dune, redevelopment, Shoreline Capital, Green Hollow Assets, but the signatures on the closing documents all traced back to the same firm, same notary stamp, same closing attorney. I ran a background check on the lawyer's license. She hadn't practiced in New Jersey until last year, and her office address listed a WeWork that didn't show her name on the tenant board. It was a shell game, and I was already too far in to ignore it. The next hit came from Sal, my cousin in Newark. He sent word through his guy never uses phones. The message was simple: it's casino money, off books. European. I knew better than to ask for names. Sal doesn't warn people unless he smells fire, and he'd never mentioned anything off books without cause. I checked campaign donations next. The last 2 council members who pushed back on coastal redevelopment, both were suddenly flush with re-election funds from PACs based in Florida and Nevada. Their voting records flipped almost overnight. Then I remembered something from the zoning letter. A map, code RZAC47. I searched it through old council minutes. Only one mention, buried in a dry planning report. But when I matched that designation to the GIS maps, it aligned perfectly with the stretch of boardwalk from 3rd Street to Ocean View. That was our row. And the new design specs: high density, retail, luxury residences, and public-private event space. It wasn't redevelopment, it was erasure. That night, someone left a flyer on my shop door. No logo, no contact, just 5 words in bold type: "You're not part of this." I checked the alley cameras blank, but the tone wasn't corporate. It read like a warning, not a threat. Like someone on the inside trying to keep me out of something worse. After the flyer, I stopped using my phone, bought a burner at a gas station upstate, and paid cash. I also switched cars, borrowed my cousin Gina's old Corolla, and left the shop van parked in the alley, under the dead camera I'd never fixed. The next morning, a health inspector showed up unannounced. Young guy, new badge, too polished. For a town like this, he walked in like he already had the violations written down. Said my walk-in fridge was running 2 degrees high, even though I'd serviced it last month. Then he found a hairnet violation, grease build-up on a vent, and a box of tomatoes stacked too close to the floor. The fine was steep, not enough to shut me down, but enough to cause pain. As he left, he didn't say goodbye, just gave me a tight nod, like he was checking a box. Later that week, a bank letter arrived by certified mail. My business loan was under review for compliance irregularities. I'd never missed a payment. But the letter wasn't about payments, it was about leverage. When I called, the Rep put me on hold for 10 minutes before transferring me to someone handling redevelopment inquiries. That's when I knew this wasn't just pressure, it was a full court press. They wanted me scared, not just out of the shop, but out of the way. I started sleeping in the back office with the lights off. I only left through the rear door, kept my route varied. I even used the beach path once, in the middle of the night, just to see if anyone followed. They didn't. But the next morning, a city truck blocked the alley. Drainage work, the guy said, not making eye contact. I knew better. They were testing how close I was to the edge, trying to see if I'd fold like the others. But I didn't fold. I adapted. Pulled out the old stash USB drives, burner email credentials, a digital scanner I hadn't touched since Pop's trial. If they were going to scrub me, they'd have to do it quick. Because now, I wasn't just holding out. I was watching. Back, and I had names. The first real crack came from a bartender at Vitas. The kind of kid who notices things because he's too quiet to interrupt and too smart to ignore. He pulled me aside one night after last call, said he overheard two suits talking near the back, booth one with a southern accent, the other with a voice like a dentist, calm, precise, cold. They were bragging about something called Phase 3 and a vote that had already been bought. The kid didn't know the details, but he remembered one thing, a name, Coral Strand Advisory. I didn't show it on my face, but that was the match I needed. Coral Strand wasn't a development firm. It was a front for capital out of Luxembourg, tied to a casino investment fund that hadn't operated publicly in the US for over a decade. That's when it made sense. This wasn't about condos. It was about licensing. If they could prove this corridor was underperforming, blighted even, they could fast-track a gaming exemption. State law lets casinos bypass normal zoning if they revitalize distressed areas. It's legal cleanup dressed like economic recovery. I went home that night and opened up every file my father ever left behind. Court transcripts, scanned ledgers, affidavits never submitted. Buried in one of his old folders was something I'd forgotten, off the book's favor for a councilman named Matteo, done quietly during a port zoning dispute in '96. Matteo was still around, still bitter, and now in the minority, but he hated the new block more than he hated me. I sent him an email from a burner account with a single PDF attached to parcel purchase histories, tied to the same attorney of record. 2 hours later, I got a reply. One word, meet. We sat in the back of a shuttered VFW, no lights except from the jukebox still running on a wall timer. He didn't shake my hand. Didn't need to. I laid it all out in OSHIP links, shell firms, email chains routed through proxies, and a draft proposal that hadn't been filed yet but matched the language of their so-called beautification initiative. He didn't ask how I got it. He just read. And when he was done, he said something I hadn't expected. This won't stop them, but it'll slow them. Long enough to make a move. I nodded. That was all I needed. A window. The window came fast. 3 days after the meeting with Matteo, his office leaked a confidential memo to a local paper one, of the last independents not owned by a media conglomerate. The memo outlined anticipated zoning exemptions for commercial casinos along the coast, disguised as a public use initiative. Within hours, the news caught fire. The mayor called it a fabrication, but the document had council letterhead and digital tracebacks. I stayed out of sight. No interviews, no quotes. I wanted them guessing, not pointing. That same night, I delivered a package to an old friend from high school now, a local cop with a clean record and a kid in college. Inside were printed documents, a thumb drive with email chains, and a notarized affidavit linking Coral Strand to offshore transfers just before the redevelopment zone expanded. I told him he didn't have to do anything, just read it. He called me 4 hours later, voice tight. Said his captain told him to drop it, then reassigned him to parking enforcement. That confirmed it. The reach wasn't just political, it was institutional. The pushback started immediately. A city truck accidentally clipped my shop's water main. Utilities marked my property for safety inspection. A building inspector came by twice in the same week, citing a missing exit sign and paint chipping on a storage closet door. But the real move came when a letter arrived from the Department of Labor anonymous complaint, alleging wage violations. I only had 2 part-timers and paid them cash, clean and fair. But they knew that just opening a case could tie me up for months. Still, the leaks worked. Other business owners started coming forward quietly, carefully. One had footage of a meeting between a broker and a zoning officer, both too confident to notice the phone recording in his shirt pocket. Another had emails from her accountant, warning her to sell before unofficial assessments kicked in. I compiled everything into a master file: names, timestamps, purchase trails, backed it up to 3 drives, locked the files with basic encryption, and sent copies to Matteo, the cop, and a city planner with more enemies than friends. It wasn't a win. Not yet, but it was movement. Enough pressure cracks to start letting the light in. Enough dirt to make someone flinch. The break came on a Tuesday. I was in the back of the shop scanning receipts when I got the text. Press. Confi, 11 a.m., City Hall. Be ready. It was from Matteo. I locked the shop, grabbed the last clean shirt I owned, and made my way downtown. The plaza was full cameras, notepads, and a few protest signs from residents who'd finally put 2 and 2 together. Matteo stepped to the mic, flanked by 2 other council members and a man I didn't recognize, state auditor, I'd learn. Later, what followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, clinical, and devastating. He listed names, contracts, shell firms, wire transfers. He used words like procurement, fraud, and improper influence. Then he announced a full review of the redevelopment corridor, pending federal oversight. The crowd erupted. Reporters started shouting questions. I kept my head down and left before anyone could pin a mic in my face. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like the start of something messy. That night, one of the brokers someone tied to 3 of the shell purchases was picked up at Newark Airport, trying to board a flight to Panama. A zoning officer resigned via email, citing health reasons. The lawyer behind the quarrel. Strand documents stopped showing up to her shared office. Within the week, the city froze all redevelopment permits along the boardwalk. I lost the shop anyway. The inspection violations stuck, and the fines added up faster than I could move money. They said a 1987 fire code clause disqualified my building from commercial food prep. I didn't fight it. The battle wasn't about pizza. It never was. What I kept was the story. I walked that boardwalk for the last time in spring tourists, snapping photos. Kids chasing gulls, the same sea breeze I grew up with. Nothing looked different, but everything had changed. Not because I stopped them, I didn't. But I made sure someone saw what they were doing. I made sure they couldn't do it quietly. People say if you stay clean, you stay safe. That's not true. In towns like this, built on favors and secrets, You don't choose between clean and dirty. You choose what kind of dirt you can live with. And I made my peace with mine. Before we dive into the next story, if you're enjoying this descent into the quiet corners of forgotten towns, go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And hey, tell me in the comments, do you want more small-town conspiracy stories? Or is there another kind of mystery you'd like to hear next? Your voice helps decide what dark corners we explore next. I used to think memories stayed in cloth longer than they did in people. That was before I realized someone was trying to erase both. My name is Jamie Leckroft. I'm a textile archivist turned shop owner. Well, I was, before everything changed. Leckroft and Thread sat on a quiet stretch of Church Gate. The sort of street you'd miss if you blinked between the butcher's and a vape shop. It wasn't glamorous, just brick, dust, and the ghost of industry. But inside, it was sacred, a shrine to forgotten fibers. I'd built my boutique on principal salvaged wool, unbleached cotton. Stitching techniques lost to the 1950s. Each piece told a story. And stories, I thought, deserved protection. The first closure was barely a headline. A dye house near Frog Island. Then a pattern workshop in Stronegate. One by one, the old independents shuddered. Not for lack of work, but for compliance. Issues, whatever that meant. I remember Amar from Spindle and Bone calling me after he got hit. They cited me for poor ventilation, he'd said, voice flat. But Jamie, no one even came inside. That's when the knot started forming in my stomach. At first, I blamed council, overreach, cheap bureaucracy, faceless and flawed. But then it got specific. Studios with deep knowledge, places teaching apprentices real technique, were always first to go. Meanwhile, flashy pop-ups with imported goods and AI-run design boards sprang up overnight. It didn't feel random, and Leicester isn't big. Word travels, especially in the underground stitching groups I frequent. I started hearing the same whispers, files erased from the planning office database, permits lost mid-application, sudden inspections that led to indefinite closures. No appeals, no warnings, just gone, the worst part. The spaces didn't stay empty. They were bought up fast, always by the same shell firms. A friend in conveyancing tipped me off every acquisition tied back to one entity. Endline Group, supposedly sustainable, London-based, but their so-called green fashion line looked disturbingly familiar. Same cuts, same hem weights. The kind of detail you only got from the old hands here. Something was happening. Something methodical. I wasn't sure what yet. But I knew it wasn't just about thread and dye. It was about memory. And memory, once stolen, doesn't come back easy. I kept the lights low after closing, just enough to cast long shadows over the shelves. It made the room feel older, like time moved differently in here. I'd started leaving a notebook by the register, jotting down names, closure dates, and the inspection codes that kept repeating. B. Uno dos cuatro. F7303. A1919. They weren't random, and they kept showing up in the same sequence. Amar had the same list posted on his fridge, written in his daughter's glitter pen. We didn't know what they meant, only that they always came before someone lost everything. The next lead came from a mistake. I'd ordered a bulk lot of dead stock corduroy from a defunct mill in Narborough. The package came with more than fabric. Wedged between rolls was a USB stick labeled owner files. Most of it was normal orders, Invoices, but one folder was different. It was encrypted, labeled line red. After some coaxing from an IT guy, I knew who owed me a favor. We cracked it. Inside were sketches, detailed CAD files, and fabric simulations for a new clothing line. Each file was time-stamped months before the mill had shut down, and every design, down to the cut and color, now lived on Endline's flagship site. That was the moment everything shifted. It wasn't just about closing shops or stealing ideas. They were harvesting design languages, translating them into scalable, AI-optimized replicas. The soul was gone, but the shell sold better. The originals were buried. I felt sick. I'd worn those shapes, touched the seams with reverence, thinking I was preserving something. But I'd been buying echoes, manufactured nostalgia. I printed everything, hard copies only. Digital felt too easy to wipe. I stored the files in a fireproof box under the floorboards in the stockroom. Then I started visiting the others. Owners who hadn't spoken publicly, the ones who'd quietly disappeared from the scene. Some had moved on. Some didn't want to talk. But a few, especially the older ones, were ready. They remembered what it felt like to be erased. It wasn't about proving theft anymore. It was about proving intent. Because once you start treating culture like inventory, there's no telling what else you'll commodify. It didn't take long before I noticed someone was watching me. Not obviously. No trench coats or dark cars. Just small things. A woman who lingered too long outside the shop without coming in. A man I'd never seen before, asking odd questions about a jacket I hadn't displayed. A city council email account, pinging my inbox minutes after I downloaded another closure report. It was subtle, but consistent, like someone nudging me from behind without ever touching me. That week, I visited Hazel, one of the last dye specialists, still working with natural indigo. She'd moved her setup into the back of a flower shop, in waistcoats, hiding the vats behind a wall of hydrangeas. Her hands were always blue at the knuckles. She didn't need convincing. They didn't just take my license, she said. They took my client list, my patterns. I caught someone copying my sketchbook the day before my inspection. She handed me a battered ledger, its corners dark with wear. Inside were dye formulas, ratios, annotations in faded pencil. On the back page, she'd taped a business card, Dendline Group's regional sourcing director. The ink bled where she'd underlined the phone number twice. More pieces started fitting together. A former apprentice messaged me through a private group thread, warning that the council's inspection teams were being subcontracted, not official staff, not union. I traced one named Seaman Collar. He'd filed over a dozen inspection reports in under a month, each leading directly to property sieges. He wasn't listed on any public contracts. No business license, no photo ID, but his signature matched. Slanted left, tight cursive, always followed by an obscure reference number, CR98X. I tried to track him down. The phone number on his last report rang once, then dropped. The address led to an empty lot. When I asked a contact in building permits to look deeper, she went quiet. A few hours later, I got a blank envelope slid under my shop door. No return address. Inside was a swatch of fabric I didn't recognize. Grey coarse, unfinished. Stitched into the center, in red thread, were 3 words. Stop remembering this. I kept it, not out of courage, but because I knew whoever sent it didn't understand people like me. We don't forget, we preserve. After the fabric warning, I stopped sleeping properly. I left the lights off at night, even inside, and unplugged anything with a microphone. My routines tightened. I only used cash. I stopped using the back entrance. The paranoia wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a draft under a door constant and hard to block. But I didn't stop digging. If anything, it made me more careful. I started meeting with a small circle in the back room of an old mechanic's garage, the kind that still smelled like iron and grease. Amar came Hazel, too. A few younger designers who had gone fully underground, their storefronts gone, but their work still alive in private WhatsApp groups and encrypted folders. We called ourselves the Salvage. No manifesto, no real plan, just a shared refusal to disappear. We shared documents, strategies, evidence. One designer, Cass, had intercepted an AI-generated design draft that matched her 2016 capsule collection line for line. The file had endline metadata and a timestamp dated 6 months before her studio had been raided for unauthorized chemical storage. We added it to the archive. I took charge of organizing everything. I was good at classification, at spotting, pattern logic. I mapped out what we'd found: inspection logs, digital forgeries, back-end website data, overlapping trademarks. The web was massive but clear. Endline wasn't just copying. They were stripping cultural identity, rebranding it as sustainable futurism, and selling it back to the public as innovation. Our histories were being rinsed clean, sold with minimalist tags and meaningless slogans. One night, after everyone had left, I stayed in the garage alone. I laid out a table of hand-stitched samples we'd rescued: old Union badges, regional embroidery styles, dye test strips from long-closed mills. I ran my fingers across the textures, each one a fingerprint and thread. None of this existed anymore on paper. No grants, no registries, no archives, just scraps. And yet, those scraps told the truth. Not the corporate one, not the glossy press releases or the influencer partnerships. The real one. The one made with hands and fire and patience. That's when I decided we wouldn't just save these pieces. We'd show them in public, on our terms. We chose the wool factory on the edge of the canal, abandoned since 1984, no windows intact, roof half collapsed. It had once employed over 200 people. Now it was just brick and silence. But the space had bones. We cleared it slowly, week by week. Brought in lights, rigged from car batteries and old construction lamps. Ran a heavy-duty extension from a bakery down the street, whose owner didn't ask questions as long as we kept the noise down. We swept the dust, cleared the rust, and hung blackout cloth over the open walls. The show wasn't just a protest. It was a declaration. No branding, no logos, no commercial sponsors. Just work, stitching, structure, movement. Every piece told. A story: Cass's reclaimed railway uniforms reimagined as outerwear. Amar's hand-dyed saris lined with industrial mesh. Hazel's raw indigo prints etched into linen like ink on parchment. We didn't use models. We walked the line ourselves, silent and slow, one after the other under the flickering overheads. I set up a single camera offline, local drive only on. We live-streamed from an anonymous link posted just minutes before it began. No marketing. Just a pulse through our private networks and a few trusted journalists. Word spread fast. Within an hour, viewers climbed into the thousands, then tens of thousands. I narrated quietly over the footage, described each piece, its origin, the techniques used, the shop it came from, and how it was lost. I named inspection, codes, council departments, Endline subsidiaries. We showed documents, midstream scanned reports, altered permits, design overlays. Every slide a receipt. It took less than a day. By the next morning, our link had been mirrored across forums and news aggregators. A whistleblower came forward anonymously, leaking internal Endline emails detailing inspection, bribes and acquisition. Plans, hashtags trended. A local paper picked it up, then a national one. We watched it unfold from the factory floor, surrounded by thread, bolts, and rusted scaffolding. Someone had spray-painted the old factory wall just before dawn. You can't steal what we've already shared. We didn't say much, just sat in the quiet. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like arrival. The fallout came faster than any of us expected. Within 48 hours, Endline's public relations team issued a vague statement about unfounded claims and ongoing reviews. It only made things worse. Journalists started calling first local outlets, then national ones. A major investigative podcast requested an interview. I declined. We agreed no single voice should represent us. Our evidence had already spoken. Then came the legal threats. Emails from solicitors claiming defamation and breach of privacy. We ignored them. Hazel scanned every letter and posted them anonymously, line by line, with commentary. The court of public opinion had already turned. Former Endline employees began leaking more documents, purchase orders, internal memos, software logs showing predictive design models fed directly from shuttered workshop portfolios. A week later, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of former shop owners. Cass testified remotely. Amar appeared on a panel with a textile historian from the university. Even the council couldn't keep quiet. 2 inspectors resigned. A procurement manager was suspended pending investigation. The cracks were visible now, and there was no hiding them. My shop never reopened. The front window remained boarded from the night it was smashed. Occasionally, someone would leave flowers or old sewing tools at the door, silent acknowledgements from people I'd never met. I stayed out of the spotlight. The others moved forward with the movement, more public than I could ever be. That was the deal we made. I documented. They spoke. The factory became something else. Not a gallery, not a workspace. Just a place people came to remember. Former workers brought in photos, old badges, scraps of uniforms. We pinned them to the walls, unframed and unprotected. Nothing curated, just left where hands placed them. The building filled with stories, the kind you can't steal or brand. Late one night, I returned alone. I walked the line where we'd staged the show. The air still held the faint scent of oil and dust. I stood beneath the same flickering bulb and thought about everything we'd lost, and how much of it we'd recovered, not with revenge, but with proof. It wasn't justice, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The headlines faded, as they always do. Endline's CEO stepped down. A few fines were issued. An internal review promised transparency. But most of the machine kept moving. Their stock dipped, then stabilized. They launched a rebranding campaign 6 months later. New logo, same silence. We knew not to expect a full reckoning. Systems like that don't collapse. They adapt. But something had shifted. The old workshops didn't return, but neither did the fear. Small studios began opening, again not as businesses, but as collectives. No central storefronts, no easy addresses, just quiet rooms behind cafes, under train arches, above florists. Places where the work continued, hands steady, purpose intact. I still walked by my old shop sometimes. The sign was gone, the space gutted. It had been converted into a minimalist espresso bar. Exposed brick, soft jazz, no trace of Lecroft and thread. But I didn't feel bitter. What mattered had moved elsewhere in notebooks, memory, and people. Hazel started teaching again, unofficially. Amar took on 2 apprentices. Cass held open workshops in the back of a music venue on weekends. We shared materials across cities now thread wool, stories, none of it monetized, all of it preserved. A week later, one of the whistleblowers mentioned a familiar name, Collar, not in an official memo, but scribbled in the margin of an internal meeting agenda, then hastily blacked out. I kept the image. No explanation. Just proof someone remembered him. I moved into a small flat above a warehouse on the edge of the canal. The factory was just across the water, still standing. We never locked it. People came and went. Some left. Fabric samples, others left nothing but silence. It became a kind of living archive. No schedule, no curators. Just shared space. Some nights I'd sit by the window, listening to the quiet hum of the city rebuilding itself. I'd think about that red thread on the coarse swatch, the words stitched with warning. I never threw it away. I kept it in a drawer beside my bed, a reminder of how close we came to forgetting everything. But we didn't. It wasn't revenge, just receipts enough to make them blink. They'd rewritten the future, sure, but they couldn't scrub what was already stitched into the seams. And in those seams, something real stayed behind, just enough to start again. People come to Nottingham for the myths, but what I found under Castle Gate wasn't legend, it was a warning left in stone. I used to think folklore was just entertainment, clever, distraction. I ran walking tours that leaned hard into that idea. Robin Hood, haunted caves, whispers of plague, pitsweed past pubs older than most governments. And I'd tell stories with a smile, always knowing which facts to blur for effect. I liked the theatre of it. I liked watching people lean in, captivated by something that felt ancient and true, even if it wasn't. But that changed last winter, when they broke ground on the Dunlax Hotel development. What should have been routine excavation turned strange. Overnight. The initial photos weren't supposed to get out, but a construction worker posted one in a local Facebook group before it vanished. A narrow stone corridor, maybe 6 feet tall, lined with scorched black markings that didn't match any known iconography. A passage sealed with lead bolts and a Latin carving too degraded to cleanly translate. The next day, the area was fenced off and flagged for a gas leak, though no utility records existed for that stretch of Castle Gate. I went back to the archives like a man retracing a nightmare. I'd volunteered there for years. Half the staff knew me by name, but suddenly my badge wouldn't scan. I wasn't just locked out, I was erased. That was the first sign something was off. The second came in the form of silence. Emails too. Council members I'd worked with bounced back. My messages to the Nottingham Historical Preservation Society disappeared from their inbox. One of them, a woman named Louise I'd known for 5 years, blocked my number. I couldn't prove any of it, but the chill I felt wasn't imagined. Something had been uncovered that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. It wasn't just curiosity that drove me deeper. It was familiarity, because the symbols in that deleted photo, the ones burned into the tunnel wall, I'd seen sketches of them before, buried in a forgotten ledger dated 1834, a ledger marked with a single red wax seal, never catalogued. That was the moment I stopped treating this as myth. This was something else, and someone didn't want it remembered. I spent weeks trying to get back into the archives, but the system had been scrubbed. Even my login to the public records terminal was revoked. I wasn't just locked out, I was erased. That's when I started working from home. I had scanned copies of older documents, mostly from my research into outlaw folklore, but some of them went deeper. One, a soot-marked map from 1834, showed non-sanctioned voids beneath castle gate notations that didn't match city planning records. I remembered skimming over it years ago, assuming it was a clerical oddity, but now it read like a warning. I found references to a private correspondence between Mayor Aldous Kent and a royal inspector, dated July 1835. The letter described a sealed vestibule of uncertain origin, discovered during sewer works and classified under royal injunction as restless ground. That phrasing echoed something I'd read before, tales from 17th century local sermons that warned against the stirring of cursed soil beneath. God's watch. The more I read, the more the pieces started to connect. Every few decades, there were quiet mentions of delays, redirections, and sudden deaths during subterranean work in the same half-mile radius. Always dismissed, always forgotten. I mapped it all: plumbing reroutes in 1904, unexplained sinkholes. In 1957, a councilman's fatal fall in 1971 that never made national news. The locations formed a rough circle, and at the center sat the Dunlocks construction site. I wasn't alone in this. Over the years, I'd met people on my tours who weren't just there for ghost stories. One of them, Marcus, had urban exploration, gear, and a habit of asking the right kind of questions. I reached out. Within days, we'd formed a quiet team: him, a freelance journalist named Kira, and an archaeology grad student who used to assist on digs but was now blacklisted for filing preservation objections. We shared files in encrypted folders, met at odd hours, never in the same place twice. We weren't trying to blow anything open yet. We just wanted the truth. But even in that early phase, things felt off. One night, Kira found her hard drive, wiped clean. Marcus said his flat had been searched. Nothing stolen, just touched. We hadn't published a word, but somehow, someone already knew we were looking. We started tracing the Dunlocks project through public records, but the trail didn't go far. The company was registered offshore, tied to a web of shell corporations that obscured any real ownership. But we found something else: building permits, filed months before the land was officially sold, along with a successful petition to remove the site from Nottingham's heritage risk classification. That meant no archaeological oversight, no city historian reviews, just a fast-track path to breaking ground. The application was co-signed by a councillor who'd previously championed heritage conservation. When Kira called his office, the assistant claimed he was on extended leave. 2 days later, his name disappeared from the council's website. That was when the messages began. First, a text from an unknown number: "You're chasing shadows. Best to stop." Then, an envelope through Marcus's letterbox with no return address inside. A grainy photo of him entering the tunnels near Weekday Cross, circled in red ink. We hadn't told anyone about that visit. Not even Kira. That night, I swept my flat for bugs. Found nothing. But I stopped leaving my curtains open. Marcus took it harder. He stopped sleeping, said he kept hearing faint voices through his walls. He didn't think it was paranoia. He thought it was interference, sound bleeding in from somewhere it shouldn't. I didn't laugh. I believed him, because the closer we got, the more Nottingham itself began to feel ... altered. Streetlights flickered in patterns. Council websites updated and rolled back without explanation. A CCTV pole near Castle Gate vanished one day and returned the next, newer and pointed straight at the construction site. We didn't know what we were looking at anymore, just that it wasn't urban development. One night, while reviewing historical blueprints, the archaeology student Shen found a diagram labeled substructure 3A, inadmissible tier. It had no listed depth, no access shaft, just a faint spiral symbol marked in pencil beside it. I'd seen that symbol once before, on the keystone in the deleted contractor photo. We triple-checked the scan. It was real. A structure was already there, long before Dunlop's laid foundation, and someone had buried it in ink and concrete. We decided to find the structure ourselves. Jen had pinpointed a probable access route through a service tunnel off Woolpack Lane, once used for coal deliveries in the early 1900s. It connected to older catacombs beneath the Guildhall ruins, long sealed by the council. Marcus had already mapped part of it during a solo urbex trip 2 years earlier. Back then, he'd hit a collapsed wall and turned back. Now, we knew what might lie beyond it. We waited for a foggy night. Less chance of being noticed. Marcus, lead, carrying a compact crowbar and a headlamp rigged for low-beam red light. Kira and I followed, each with small pack stools, camera, backup power, first aid. We passed through a broken grate behind an abandoned substation into a tunnel of damp brick and silence. The air was thick with decay. It felt too still, like the earth was holding its breath. We reached the old collapse just past midnight. The bricks looked scorched, not just fallen, as if heat or force had buckled them from within. We cleared a narrow passage, just wide enough to crawl. What waited on the other side wasn't natural. Smooth stone walls curved inward at the top, forming a shallow arch. No mortar, no tool. Marks. The surface was matte black, cold to the touch, despite the stale warmth of the tunnels. Jen said the architecture didn't match anything local. Not Saxon, not Roman, not industrial. Something older raw, something else. About 10 meters in, we found the spiral. It was etched into the floor, almost imperceptible unless the light hit it right. A single line, unbroken, curling toward the center of the chamber. At its core sat a hollow depression, too precise to be erosion. Kira knelt beside it, snapping photos. Then her camera died. Mine followed, then the headlamps. Total darkness. Not gradual, but instant, like a switch had been flipped. We froze. No one spoke. In that silence, we felt it. There was a sensation, not quite sound, more like a low pressure behind the ears, the kind you get deep underwater. It wasn't vibration or breath, just a presence, low, constant. When the lights flickered back, the spiral was gone. The floor looked smooth again, no markings, no indentation. Maybe it was a trick of dust, moisture, or the way our lights had hit it. But none of us said that out loud. We all knew what we saw. None of us spoke for days after that night. We stayed in touch, but the tone had shifted. We no longer talked about plans or next steps, just weathered silence and clipped updates. Something had changed down there, something we couldn't explain. I tried reviewing Kira's camera. But every photo past the spiral came up corrupted. Not black, not static, just empty frames, like the lens had forgotten how to see. Marcus scanned his notes, but his tunnel sketch was missing the final chamber. He swore he'd drawn it. I believed him. Kira vanished from our chats. The night before, she'd sent a short message. Said she was going to double-check something at the council records office, alone. She thought she'd found a discrepancy in the original zoning dates. That was the last we heard. I called her twice straight. To voicemail. Marcus checked her flat and found her door locked from the inside. Kettle still warm. No sign of a struggle. Just absence, quiet and complete. He left a note under her door. It was still there 3 days later. Jen tried to stay grounded. She buried herself in old civic engineering journals, cross-referencing construction records with hand-drawn maps from the 1800s. One entry stood out. A footnote in a 1921 sewer assessment that referred to recurrent structural anomalies beneath the north slope of Castle Rock. The report was dismissed without review, but the site matched the same spiral radius we'd plotted weeks before. The language was subtle, but familiar deliberate avoidance phrased as oversight. Then Marcus stopped responding. I waited 2 days, then went to his place. His flat was clean, lights on, windows locked, but his laptop was gone. So was his notebook. His coat and boots were by the door, as if he'd only stepped out for air. I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up with my notes, organizing everything for the 3rd time in a week. I made copies, wrote summaries, kept a small recorder running just in case. Then I remembered the council press event. It had been moved forward, now set for that weekend. A soft launch of the Dunlock site with champagne, speeches, and curated tours of the refurbished grounds. No mention of the tunnels. No archaeology team invited. I registered under a false name, printed a badge from a defunct preservation group, and packed every piece of evidence I had left, not to stop them. That window had closed, but someone had to see it. Someone outside the chain. Someone still listening. The knock didn't come. Not that night or the next. But the silence felt worse. I kept waiting for something, an approach, a warning, even a threat. But the stillness stretched on, thick and unnatural. It was as if we'd crossed a line that even our watchers didn't want to acknowledge. Kira vanished. Marcus disappeared. Jen stopped responding to their absence weighed more than any message could. I returned to the council offices under the pretense of updating old guide permits. It was a stretch, but I wanted eyes on the development files. The building had changed. Security was tighter. Rooms I'd visited years ago were locked, glassed over. One hallway near planning records had a new door at the Enthic steel with no sign, no keypad, just a single slot for ID. I watched someone enter. They used a black card I'd never seen before. The light blinked green and the door hissed. Open. That night, I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a messaging, actual letter. I copied all my notes by hand, left out names, included the map with the spiral site marked clearly. I mailed it to a journalist I trusted from years back, someone who once exposed a university fraud case and paid dearly for it. I didn't sign my name. I only wrote, "They're building over something that was never meant to be uncovered. The earth remembers, and it wants silence." Then I went home, turned off every device, and waited. The morning of the launch, Castle Gate was washed clean. No dust, no noise, no trace of what had been unearthed. The Dunlop's banners hung from iron poles, printed with words like legacy, renewal, and future. The crowd was small press, investors, council members in tailored suits. I moved among them unnoticed, just another name on a lanyard. No one asked questions. No one looked down. A temporary stage had been set near the entrance. The mayor stood at the podium, praising the development as a model of cultural respect and architectural sensitivity. Behind him, the hotel's lobby shimmered with new glass and polished limestone. But I wasn't watching the stage. I watched the fenced perimeter and the security detail positioned along the eastern boundary. Too many guards for a soft launch. Too many locked doors behind staff-only signs. At the catered reception, I found her the journalist I'd written to. She was younger than I remembered, but sharper, scanning the room instead of the hors d'oeuvres. I approached her, quietly, and placed a folder on the table between us. She didn't react, didn't speak, just slid it beneath her coat and nodded once. That was enough. Then something changed. A tremor not seismic, but subtle. A pressure in the chest, a shift in the air. People paused mid-conversation. One man dropped a glass. Security radios crackled faintly, then went silent. I saw a light. Above the hotel entrance flicker, then pulse steadily. No one moved to fix it. The mayor cleared his throat, continuing his speech with a brief stumble, as if forgetting the next word. When he glanced back at the building, something in his expression cracked just for a second. Then he recovered. Applause followed. I left before the toast. Slipped out through the side gate, past a maintenance door that hadn't been locked. Properly, behind it, the corridor sloped downward. Finished, raw concrete. I knew where it led. I didn't follow. Some doors stay closed. That night, the story broke. The journalist had acted faster than I'd hoped. Photos, maps, the 1834 decree, questions too detailed to ignore. Dunlux issued a statement calling it all historic misinterpretation. But Nottingham remembered, not the myths, the warning buried beneath them, and I remembered what Kira said before she vanished. It doesn't want to be found, but it never left. They told us history is written by the victors, but no one warns you when it's rewritten by developers. My name is Miles Petty. I used to dissect lies for the intelligence community. Now I polish brass lamps and argue over the authenticity of war buttons in a sleepy Virginia town people only visit for foliage and fried pies. I left the government a decade ago. Thought I was done with surveillance feeds, asset memos, and the art of omission. But truth has a way of finding you even, buried beneath colonial ink and ledger paper. It started with an elderly widow who brought in a leather-bound document for appraisal, claimed it had been in her family for generations. Probably just another forged militia pass, or a grandfather's tall tale etched in parchment. Except this, one felt different. The ink was vibrant, too vibrant, not counterfeit, just preserved. The letter detailed a 1778 land survey of the Ashcroft Valley, same valley the state had recently approved for major infrastructure development. The dates aligned, but the boundaries didn't. According to this letter, the land hadn't been unclaimed wilderness, as the records stated. It had been privately owned, documented, measured, and signed by a Captain Emery Ransom. Official records say Ransom disappeared in winter 1777, never declared dead, just vanished. Curiosity, the kind I'd spent years learning to suppress, took root again. I dug into county records. Their scans were too perfect. Not a smudge, not a curl. Almost all post-2002. Anything earlier had errors during digitization. The local archivist, a friend of mine from college, agreed to pull physical files. We had coffee once, talked about faulty OCR logs and broken chain of custody tags. When I tried to schedule a second meeting, he stopped replying altogether. His phone rang once, then nothing. Next week, he was on indefinite leave. The patterns were subtle, but familiar, an invisible force massaging the timeline, erasing inconvenient facts and reshaping legal memory. My hands shook when I tried to catalogue the anomalies. Missing land deeds, redacted property inheritance logs, birth records rewritten with younger dates, as if generations had been skipped. Somewhere in all that, I stopped believing this was coincidence. Something or someone was laundering history. And if that were true, then Ashcroft wasn't just another forgotten valley. It was a liability someone was willing to bury again. I knew better than to chase ghosts without backup, so I started small. Public records, utility logs, old phone books, anything that hadn't been digitized yet. I stuck to analog at first. The data bled together. Names, dates, plot lines. Then I noticed something I couldn't explain. There were gaps in the census logs for the Ashcroft Valley region. Not just the expected clerical voids, but deliberate omissions. Families that should have been listed based on school rosters. Land tax assessments, even obituaries simply weren't. It was like whole bloodlines had been snipped out of public record. I compared physical scans from the state library to the digital versions available online. The originals had annotations, handwritten footnotes, marginal corrections. The scans didn't. They'd been airbrushed, clean to clean. The names were there, but the context had been stripped. No references to homesteads, no occupations, no civic involvement, just placeholders. I paid a visit to the Ashcroft Heritage Museum, hoping to find unfiltered archives. The director, Silas Greeley, greeted me with a politician's warmth, firm handshake, empty eyes. Said he admired my shop and always meant to stop in. I didn't mention the letter yet. I asked about Revolutionary War holdings. He walked me through the newly renovated wing, walls lined with glossy placards and motion sensor exhibits. It all felt off, sanitized. Every artifact backed by a digital kiosk that fed you curated summaries, not source material. I requested access to their research collection. Silas smiled tightly and said those records were in transition to a new digital platform. "We're modernizing the past," he said, like it was a slogan. That night, I sat in the back of my shop and reread the letter under a forensic loupe. The fibers were consistent with 18th century rag paper. Ink corrosion matched age, but something still bothered me, the crease lines. They were too crisp. Whoever preserved this had unfolded it only once, recently. That meant someone had been sitting on this for a long time, waiting. But for what? My gut told me the timing of the development push and this letter surfacing weren't a coincidence. Someone wanted the past uncovered just enough to trigger attention, not enough to stop it. Either it was bait, or it was a warning. I wasn't sure which scared me more. I spent the next few days tracing the officer's name, Captain Emery. Ransom through everything I could find. The results were strange. He appeared in a few Revolutionary War rosters from 1776, assigned to a survey division out of Williamsburg. After that, nothing. No pension records, no casualty reports, no discharge. Just one archived letter written by a fellow officer to... Months later, stating Ransom had departed from Richmond unexpectedly, destination unknown. That phrasing stuck with me. Departed, not deserted. And why would an officer be surveying undeveloped land that late in the war, especially so far from active fighting? Something about it didn't sit right. I dug into land grant records issued after the war and found something else. The valley in question had been set aside for future agricultural use, but no documentation existed for any families who had lived there before the state took ownership in 1842. 100 years of silence. That kind of gap doesn't happen. By accident, I drove out to Ashcroft Valley at dawn, before the contractors arrived. The site was already staked off, flagged with orange ribbon and survey markers. I walked past the boundary signs and followed a worn deer path into the tree line. About 50 yards in, I found the remains of a stone foundation, not listed on any map. Just a broken rectangle of moss-covered rock and 2 rusted iron hinges sunk into the soil. It had once been a door. I took photos, checked for nearby wells, or fencing, found neither. But there were wild blueberry bushes growing in neat rows, too evenly spaced to be natural. Someone had cultivated this place once. Back at the shop, I ran the photos through a local historian's archive, hoping to match the structure to any known homesteads. No matches. When I called to follow up, the historian I'd spoken with just days earlier was no longer available. Moved out west, the museum staff said. No forwarding info. Another clean break. That made 3. The archivist, the land records, now this. I didn't believe in coincidence anymore. I hadn't slipped into full paranoia yet, but I could sense its outline creeping into my thinking, quiet, persistent, and getting harder to ignore. The Development Council held their monthly meeting at the Ashcroft Town Hall, a glass and brick structure that didn't match the colonial charm of the rest of Main Street. I attended as a local business owner, nothing more. The public portion of the meeting was theatre slideshows of proposed eco-lodges, broadband towers, and heritage tourism corridors. They used phrases like revitalization and sustainability, but no one mentioned eminent domain. I waited through the pleasantries and handed in a request to speak during open comments. When they called my name, I walked to the podium and held up a printed photo of the foundation I'd found. I asked if any environmental or archaeological assessments had been completed on the development site. The room went quiet. A woman in a slate-grey blazer, introduced earlier as a regional planning liaison, adjusted her mic and responded flatly. No records indicate historic significance in that area. Her tone was final, rehearsed. I didn't push. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway. A junior planner, mid-30s, eager eyes, still new enough to care, approached me. He lowered his voice and asked where the photo was taken. I told him. His expression changed. He glanced around, then handed me a business card with no title. Just a name and a direct number. If you keep digging, he said, use a landline. Then he walked off without another word. It was the last time I heard from him. I checked the planning office a week later. His name was off the directory. No resignation, no forwarding contact, just gone. That night, my laptop's browser history had new entries I hadn't made. Searches for Ashcroft's inheritance line, valley subdivision maps, and land parcel voids. I used a separate air-gapped machine for research after that. The next morning, I checked county records again. The name Ransom no longer appeared in the scanned Revolutionary rosters I'd pulled earlier. The file had been replaced with a newer version, same file name, smaller size. My backup confirmed the alteration. I wasn't just up against bad data. Someone was actively managing the truth. And if they were scrubbing history that carefully, then this wasn't just about land. It was about erasing people. I didn't know why yet, but I was getting closer, and they knew it. I didn't sleep much that week. Every sound outside felt heavier. A trash truck lingered too long. A sedan I didn't recognize parked across the street for 2 nights in a row. The antique shop, once my refuge, now felt exposed. I closed early, moved my research to the basement. I made microfilm copies of everything, letters, maps, photos, stored them in sealed tins behind rows of Civil War bayonets and forgotten ink. Wells, I stopped using email. Burner phones replaced my cell. One for calls, one for searches. I didn't trust either for long. The junior planner called once from a restricted number. His voice was flat. They're consolidating old land. Records through a private firm. All offline materials are being boxed and moved to a warehouse outside Richmond. He didn't know what happened to materials flagged for exclusion. I asked if the name Ransom had come up. He paused. No. But I saw a folder marked anomalous. Claims Valley tracked. It was red tagged. That usually means legal sensitivity. It was the last time I heard from him. I checked the planning office. A week later, his name was off the directory. No resignation, no forwarding contact. Just gone. I needed to act before I lost everything. So I made a copy of the letter. Not a perfect one. I altered it slightly enough to mirror the digital forgeries I'd uncovered in the archives. Dates adjusted, signature softened, language updated to match the council's version of the past. I used the same ink formula found on their altered documents. It wasn't hard. They were consistent, maybe too much so. Real history is messy. This was sterile. I approached the museum again, this time under the pretense of donation. I wore gloves, brought a sealed display frame and fabricated a story about discovering the letter in a cedar trunk from a recently acquired estate. Greeley wasn't there, but a younger curator accepted it eagerly. They logged it for an upcoming exhibit on lost American landmarks. That was the opening I needed. My altered copy would pass their filters, but embedded in the frame was a microdot, invisible to the eye, encoded with the original letter and all supporting materials. I positioned it just behind the lower latch right, where their intake scanner would pass during cataloging. They'd find it, whether they knew they had or not. All I had to do now was wait. If they used it publicly, if it made it into their exhibit, others would start asking questions. I wouldn't stop the machine, but I could jam the gears. The forged letter went on display within a week. The museum issued a press release calling it a rare contribution to regional heritage. I watched from a distance, standing near the exhibit's edge, listening to passing comments. Most visitors moved on quickly, more interested in the interactive displays. But not all. 2 men lingered longer than anyone else. Middle-aged, conservative dress. One held a digital scanner that briefly passed over the frame's backing. They didn't take notes, just nodded to each other and walked out without a word. I left soon after, careful not to follow or be followed. The next day, a history blogger picked up on the exhibit. He posted a short video pointing out inconsistencies in the phrasing, claimed the letter's language didn't match revolutionary syntax. Hours later, a second post appeared anonymous, linking the same letter to a buried land dispute. It referenced the microdot's contents almost verbatim. I hadn't leaked anything. That meant someone had accessed it, and they wanted it seen. By evening, 3 more posts surfaced. A retired archivist confirmed the original survey map had been altered. A genealogist uploaded a list of missing family records tied to the Ashcroft Valley. The story gained momentum. Local news picked it up. Then it dropped. No follow-ups. Just a vague statement from the museum citing inconclusive provenance. But the damage was done. The state halted the development project, citing the need for further review of contested property claims. I didn't celebrate. I didn't sleep either. That week, 2 council members resigned quietly. Greeley announced early retirement, and the museum's research wing closed for technical upgrades. I knew what that meant. Settlements were happening behind the scenes. Not trials, not apologies. Just payouts and silences arranged in private rooms. I stayed out of sight, kept to routine. The shop reopened with shorter hours. I sold only untagged items, now no family pieces, no letters, no stories. Customers thought I'd just grown tired. Maybe I had, but mostly I understood something I hadn't before. The past isn't sacred, it's strategic, and in the wrong hands, memory becomes a weapon. I didn't win anything, but there was no victory, no headline. Just the rules clearer now than ever. Weeks passed. The headlines shifted to new stories. The museum exhibit closed quietly, with no mention of the letter or its removal. A notice on the door cited curatorial realignment. I didn't go. Back, there was nothing left to see. Whatever public interest had surfaced was now buried under legal non-disclosure and rewritten press blurbs. Ashcroft Valley remained undeveloped, but the pause wasn't permanent, just delayed. I'd bought time, not change. One morning, a plain envelope appeared beneath my shop door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed Captain Emery Ransom, unmistakably alive and standing before the foundation I had found. A handwritten note on the back read, "He died in 1801. Buried under his own porch. They knew." I sat with that for a long time. It wasn't confirmation. It was closure, offered without explanation. Whoever sent it wanted me to stop asking, and I did. I kept the shop open, stripped it of anything traceable. I sold objects by form, not story. A compass, not his compass. A journal, but not that journal. Buyers asked less when you gave them less. I kept the letters original in a fireproof case behind a false wall. The microfilm copies stayed hidden. Not because I planned to use them, but because someone might. My routine changed. I no longer searched for missing names or cross-checked altered deeds, but I noticed more. Small things, articles that disappeared after one day, mentions of historical land compliance initiatives buried in state funding bills. A growing number of properties flagged for digitization efforts with no local consultation. The pattern wasn't isolated. Ashcroft had just been a test. Sometimes I wonder if I should have done more, pushed harder, taken the whole thing public. But then I remember the archivist, the historian, the planner, all gone, all quiet. Survival isn't cowardice, it's clarity. You learn when to speak and when to encode the truth in silence. I live differently now, not with fear, but with precision. Memory, I've learned, doesn't fade. It's erased. And if you want to protect it, sometimes the safest place isn't a vault or a server. It's you, You become the archive. So, now you've seen it. The quiet towns, the missing records, the buried truth. Feels like something out of a movie, right? But it's real, and it's happening more than you think. They wanted us to forget, too late. We're watching now, and we don't look away. Not anymore. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay quiet, stay curious.